2 o'clock Saturday afternoon, Route 1 along the coast. Warm afternoon sun streamed through the window of the company car. Holt drove his wealthy client home after a 5-hour shareholder brunch. Camille slumped in the back seat, eyes closed, whispering a single word, "Mama." Her expensive clutch slipped from her lap onto the carpet. A black and white photograph spilled out, catching the bright afternoon light. Red light. Holt reached down to help. He gasped. It was his late wife's mother, the same face on Maggie's bedside table for 10 years. Green light. Stunned, he finally drove on, pulling into the Camden Harbor Inn just before 3 o'clock. The valet approached, but Holt quickly waved him off. He shut off the engine and opened the door himself. Before helping her, he slipped the mysterious photo safely into his coat pocket. Camille was barely awake, letting him gently guide her out of the car. A bellhop met them at the elevator with her suite key. At her door, she murmured without looking up, "Thank you, Pemberton." She had used his surname for 3 years. "Get some rest, ma'am," he replied. He took the inland road home, picking up his daughter, Marlo, from the babysitter at 4:30. She had a tiny bandage on her thumb from school, which he gently kissed. After serving dinner, he read her favorite book, the chapter about the great storm. She fell asleep before he could finish the story. Closing her door, he stood in the silent hallway, listening to the quiet house. He headed down to his basement workbench and pulled a dusty wooden box off the shelf. He had not opened it in 11 months. Inside, hidden under an old scarf and some letters, lay the original photograph. He placed it down, then took the new photo from his coat and laid them side by side. 2 identical prints, right down to the dark stain in the corner. The same young woman, barely 20, standing on a porch he had never seen before. He sat there on his stool in silence, calling no one. He opened his pocket notebook and wrote 3 heavy words, "Hadley, not a coincidence." The next morning, Camille woke up slowly in her hotel suite with a throbbing headache. Sun flooded the room, showing her open bag on the marble table. Reaching inside from the bed, she searched the lining and the inner pocket. The picture was missing, but a faint memory surfaced. She remembered his hand reaching down for something on the car floor. It was Pemberton. She bypassed him and called her lawyer Thea. Thea had handled her family's legal secrets since before she was born. The phone rang 4 times before Thea finally answered. "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "Always," Thea said. "Did my mother have a child before me?" A heavy silence stretched over the line as Camille paced across the room. Long enough to hear the waves crashing outside. "Camille," Thea whispered at last. "We need to meet." 6 weeks ago, Camille had been searching her mother's library for a rare book to send to a charity auction. The volume sat on a very high shelf. As she pulled it down, a hidden photograph fluttered out from the pages. I didn't know about the nameless, dateless black and white photo she'd carried in her clutch ever since. She had never asked her mother who the young woman was. Part of her just didn't want to know. But now she did. That Monday morning, Camille drove herself straight to Portland. She didn't tell the office. She didn't tell her mother either. She met Thea in a small back conference room of the Kelso and Associates building. The one with the curtains always drawn. Thea didn't even open her briefcase. She didn't produce any documents, just poured 2 black coffees, sliding one in front of Camille. "Before I say anything," Thea told her, "you should know I've been waiting for this conversation for 32 years. Not hoping, just waiting." Thea gave her no details, only a beginning. "Yes, your mother had a daughter before you. 1994 was the year. She was 19, the baby was a girl. She had named her Margaret on the form, praying every year that the family kept that name." Camille drove back to Boston that afternoon, strictly keeping to the speed limit, not a mile faster. "She didn't call me." For the first time in 3 years, she requested a different driver from our pool. The dispatcher confirmed the change within 2 minutes. He didn't ask why, he was just good at his job. That night, in her Beacon Hill apartment, she opened her laptop and made a call she'd never made in 3 years. Not to Human Resources, she called Hadley Group Internal Security. She ordered a full background trace on a current employee. "Pemberton Holt R," she specified. "Not just HR, I want his full history, federal records, and press archives." My file arrived at 11:17 the next morning, hand-delivered by a courier in a Navy windbreaker. She read my file standing up. Holt Robert Pemberton, born 1991 in Portland, Maine. United States Naval Academy, class of 2013. 3 years of active duty as a naval intelligence officer. Then Georgetown Law, an accelerated program, graduating in 2018. Hired by the Federal Bureau of Investigation that same year and assigned to the Boston field office. In the white-collar crime division, specializing in trust fund fraud and shell company networks. 2 major prosecutions of note. The first, in 2020, dismantled a complex scheme shifting family trust assets through Bermuda. The second, in 2021, exposed a New England family office that had quietly drained an estate over 15 years. Both cases resulted in convictions. Both made the inside pages of the Wall Street Journal. She read that I resigned my commission in April of 2022. 8 months later, my wife, Margaret Crane Pemberton, aged 28, passed away from pancreatic cancer. I filed my application to drive for Hadley Group just 6 weeks after her funeral. 3 years of perfect performance reviews. 3 declined offers to move up to fleet management. Camille set the report down on her kitchen counter, refusing to sit. She paced around the kitchen island once, then turned and walked back the other way. She realized a former FBI agent, a trust fraud specialist, had been driving her for 3 years. She had cried in the back of my car after difficult board meetings. She had taken private calls from her mother in my car about her father's anniversary. She had read private letters in my car, talking openly on the phone just 3 feet from me. She poured herself a glass of water. Her hand looked steady, but the water trembled. Outside her window, the lights of Boston Common flickered in the dark. She picked up her phone, hesitated, and set it down. It wasn't time to call him. At 4:15 Tuesday morning, Camille left Boston, driving herself. The drive to Camden took just under 3 hours along the inland route. She arrived before sunrise, never stopping at the resort or for morning coffee. She navigated the dark coastal road through the quiet town, turning down the dirt lane behind the wharf. Using the address from her private file, she finally found his house. It was a modest wooden cottage with a porch overlooking the gray water. As the sky began to turn gray, she did not knock. She sat in her dark car for 2 minutes. His kitchen light was already on. Through the glass, she saw his 7-year-old daughter, Marlo, sitting at the kitchen table in a nightgown. Her hair was sleep-tousled, and she was drawing with intense concentration. The little girl drew a line, lifted her pencil, and paused to study her work. Something about the corner of her mouth made Camille press her hand against the dashboard to steady herself. She stepped out, and Holt opened the door before she reached the porch. He was already wearing his coat. "I figured you would get here before 7, he said. They sat on the porch, and Holt brought out coffee in 2 enamel cups. Inside, Marlo stayed at the kitchen table behind the window, working on her drawing. She had not looked up. Holt placed a small picture frame on the bench between them. In the photo, Maggie was smiling, holding the same black and white print, laughing at something off camera. Camille stared at the photograph. "What year was Maggie born?" she asked. 1994. My mother was 19 in 1994. The wind off the water moved the bare branches of the maple in the yard. The kitchen light cast a warm yellow rectangle across the porch boards. "I didn't know," Holt said quietly, "that you were her sister. I drove you to and from work for 3 years. I didn't know." "When did you find out?" "Saturday afternoon," she replied. She turned and looked at him closely, realizing this was the first time she truly saw him. 3 years of professional distance, and she had never actually seen her driver. He was 40 pounds lighter than the photograph in his old bureau graduation file. At 35, there was gray at his temples that should not have been there. The wedding band was gone, leaving a pale line on his ring finger. She pulled the photograph from her clutch and laid it on the wooden bench. He drew his copy from his pocket and laid it next to hers, same negative. Marlo appeared at the door with round eyes. "Daddy, there is a lady." "I see her, sweetheart. This is Miss Hadley. She came to talk about a friend." Marlo studied Camille with the unguarded directness of a 7-year-old child. "Are you the lady from the brunch?" Camille felt the breath leave her chest. "Daddy told me about brunch yesterday. He said the lady fell asleep at the table." Holt didn't flinch. "Marlo, can you finish your map while we talk a few minutes?" "Okay, Daddy." The door closed. Camille looked at him. "She knows about your work?" She knows I drive a lady to meetings. She does not know who. The morning sun rose, illuminating the photographs of the family past lying on the bench. At 6:45, Camille called her mother. Come to Camden now. Camille today. Eleanor was on the road by 7:30. She arrived at his cottage at 11:02. She brought no overnight bag. Just the leather purse she always carried. He opened the door to her. His daughter Marlo stood beside him in a clean dress, the one with embroidered collar flowers. He had told Marlo only that a guest was coming. He had not said what kind. Marlo stepped forward. She offered her hand the way he had taught her. Hello, ma'am. I'm Marlo. Eleanor took the small hand, her own fingers shaking. Hello, Marlo. I'm a friend of your aunt's. Camille had not used that word yet. She let it stand. Marlo studied Eleanor for a polite 3 seconds. May I be excused upstairs, Daddy? I have a map to finish. Yes, sweetheart. His daughter climbed the stairs without looking back. They sat in the living room. He brought out tea. Eleanor took the cup but did not drink. The teacup made a small rattle against the saucer. She put it down. Camille, mother, you found the photograph in the library, the one in the book. 6 weeks ago I knew you had. I went to put a different book back on the shelf, and the gap was on the wrong side. I knew. Why didn't you ask me about it? Because I knew what you would ask me back, and I've been afraid of that question for 32 years. The room was quiet. Outside, gulls. Eleanor turned to him. She had not yet looked at him directly. She did now. You were married to my daughter. I was. I never knew her name. Margaret, Maggie. She was 28 when she died. How? Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 when they caught it. 4 months from diagnosis. Eleanor closed her eyes for a long time. When I was 19, she said, I was in love with a boy at my father's boatyard. My parents told me they would put us both on the street if I kept the baby. I signed the papers in a Catholic hospital in Portland. I was told the baby went to a good family in Vermont. I was told I couldn't know more. Camille had never seen her mother cry, not once, not at her grandfather's funeral. Not at her father's. She didn't cry now either, but her face was wet. I named her Margaret on the form. They told me the family was free to change it. I prayed every year on her birthday that they had kept it. They kept it, he said. What was she like? She was funny. She was sharp. She was kinder than I ever was. She drew maps the way Marlo does. She kept that photograph of you on her nightstand for 10 years and never knew who you were. Eleanor put her face in her hands. He rested his hand very lightly on the arm of her chair. Not on her, just on the chair, the way you steady a thing that might fall. Upstairs in Marlo's room, the soft sound of a colored pencil on paper went on. Even and unhurried, Eleanor went to the inn that evening to rest. Camille did not go with her. She walked alone down the gravel path behind the resort, the one leading to the working wharf. The April air off the water still had winter in it. The boards were dark and damp. She did not hear him come up behind her. He wore the same coat. He carried a coil of mooring line in one hand. I have a boat to check on, he said. Of course you do. We walked to the end of the wharf together and stopped at the last piling. I remember something, Camille finally said after a while. When I was 10, my mother and Thea were in the sunroom. They thought I was upstairs. My mother said something I never understood. She said, before Spencer there was a complication, and the complication has a face I see when I close my eyes. I thought it was about money. I thought it was about a business deal. I was 10. Maggie tried to find her, you know, I said. When she was 27, she wrote letters to the Archdiocese in Portland. The records were sealed. She got nothing back. A year later they found the tumor. She told me one night in the hospital that she had wanted to know what her mother's voice sounded like. She did not say it like a complaint. She said it like a fact. Camille didn't speak for a while. The light on the water shifted. Pemberton, yes, you drove me to my uncle's funeral last October. Up to Bar Harbor. You sat in the car for 2 hours in the rain while I was inside. I remember. Did you know at the time that he was your sister's uncle too? No, I didn't know any of this on Friday. I knew it Saturday at 2. By Saturday night I had not slept. By Monday morning, your background check showed up in a courier bag. She let out a small sound, not a laugh, closer to a breath. The wind picked up. The boards under her feet were slick with the morning's rain. She turned to walk back, and her heel caught. I had her elbow before she fully knew she had slipped. My hand was steady. I did not hold tighter than I needed to. I waited for her to find her footing. When she had, I did not let go right away. She did not pull away. We walked back along the planks side by side. She said very quietly, "Maggie was my sister." I did not answer in words. I nodded once slowly. We stopped at the end of the wharf where the gravel began. I stopped and let her elbow go, stepping half a pace back the way I used to step back when opening the rear door for a passenger. The habit had not yet left me. I saw it leave my own hand. "Tomorrow," I said, "Thea wants us both in Portland at 8. Us both, you and me." She said the words legal air. I don't know what she has, but she has something. Camille looked back once at the water before we walked up the gravel together. The office was small. The desk was old. Thea Kelso had been practicing law in the same room since Eleanor was 23. A box sat on the desk between us. The cardboard was yellowed at the corners, the seal on the top intact. "Sit," Thea said. We sat. "I have been waiting for a legal heir for 32 years, she said. "Today I have one." Thea cut the seal with a letter opener. "In 1994, she said. "Eleanor came to me 3 weeks after she signed the surrender papers in Portland. She was 19. She brought $4,000 she had saved from a summer job and an emerald ring her grandmother had left her. She told me to liquidate the ring and place the funds in a trust in the child's name. The trust was to be quiet. It was to grow. It was never to be touched. It was to be opened only when a direct blood heir of Margaret Crane could be legally identified." Thea opened a folder. Over the next 31 years, Eleanor added to the trust quietly, year after year. Bonuses Eleanor earned from her work at Hadley Group. With inheritances from her mother, the trust sat offshore under a corporate trustee in Wilmington, Delaware. At least according to the latest statement. The principal stands at $45,300,000. Camille did not even flinch. Thea told us that since 2002, when Spencer took over the corporate finances, he was the trustee. Eleanor signed the papers. She trusted him completely. She never had patience for paperwork, so she slid a second folder across the table. "For 22 years, she said, Spencer has been quietly and methodically reallocating the trust. The funds have been funneled through 6 shell entities: Delaware, Bermuda, and the Caymans. The trust statements sent to Eleanor every single January were not the real ones. He prepared them himself." I picked up the second folder before Thea even finished speaking. I read, my eyes scanning faster than Camille thought possible. "Bermuda layering," I said, mostly to myself, "round-tripping through a Cayman feeder. Wilmington corporate trustee, Cross & Associates." I stopped. I looked up at Thea. "Cross & Associates," I said, "yes. In 2020, I prosecuted a man named Edward Halleck for moving family trust assets this way. Same Wilmington firm, same trustee names. I won that case in Boston federal court. Yes, Mr. Halleck was defended by lawyers from a firm called Hadley & Cross. Yes." I set the folder down. For the first time since Saturday, Camille saw me look like something other than exhausted. "Spencer copied my own case file," I said, page for page. "He used the structure I dismantled in court. He assumed no one was watching." Thea said quietly, "Mr. Pemberton, do you know who has been reading?" I almost smiled. "Not quite, but I do now." Thea closed the folder. "There are 2 things to do," she said. "Reclaim the trust and kick Spencer Hadley out of the company. We can recover the trust money with the documents we have. The removal will require a board majority. They vote Friday." Camille turned to me. "My daughter," I said before she could even ask, "is the legal heir. The trust is hers. I won't let him touch what is hers. I also won't let him touch you." Camille kept looking at me. By Friday, news of our Portland meeting reached Spencer within 36 hours. He wasted no time. On Wednesday morning, he scheduled an emergency board meeting for Friday afternoon. The agenda listed just one item: a no-confidence vote in the CEO, based on allegations that personal issues were distracting her from her corporate duties. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, the head of the Hadley fleet received an internal memo directing them to fire me immediately. They cited HR violations regarding client confidentiality, supposedly broken while I was driving Camille home last Saturday. Spencer's signature was at the very bottom. He had never even met me. On Wednesday evening, a private investigator with a long lens parked down the dirt lane behind the Camden Wharf and took pictures of Eleanor Hadley walking up the steps of the cottage. By Thursday noon, all 3 of his moves were known to me, Thea, and Camille. That night, I drove out to the small rented house Camille kept in Camden, only a short walk from the local inn. It was the first time he had ever stepped into her private space. He slipped off his boots at the door, noticing she had rolled back the dining room rug. Files were laid out across the long table in 3 neat rows. Bank statements, trust records, and registration filings for shell companies. He paced back and forth along the table, studying the paperwork. He pointed, "This is layering. 3 transfers through entities in 3 different jurisdictions in 7 days, each within 10% of the last balance. This same triggering pattern shows up every single quarter." He essentially paid himself, routing the cash through a Cayman feeder directly to a Delaware management company he secretly owned using a nominee. This violates Title 18 United States Code, Section 1957. Money laundering, knowing involvement and premeditated. She listened quietly, never interrupting him. "To prosecute him criminally is up to the Department of Justice," he continued. "But our goal for Friday is far colder. We must convince the Board of Corporate Trustees that he is a financial risk they can no longer carry. To do that, we do not need to prove a crime, just show that public exposure is inevitable. And is it? Once Thea files that trust grievance on Monday morning, it will trigger a federal investigation within days. There is absolutely no way Spencer remains the board chairman a month from now." She reached across to grab a document at the edge of the table. Her fingers brushed against his on the dark wood. They both froze, neither pulling away. The storm that had lingered all evening finally broke, rain sweeping softly against the kitchen glass. She kept her hand right next to his, not touching but close. "Thank you, Holt." For the first time in 3 years she had spoken his name. Holt did not pull away. Keeping his eyes down, he replied, "This is my sister's case, Camille. You do not owe me thanks." He had spoken her name without even realizing it. The sudden familiarity hung heavily between them. She left her hand there for one more quiet breath, then pulled back to turn the next page. They worked until almost 2. Marlowe was asleep at the babysitter's. Neither of them brought it up, leaving it unspoken. By the time he stood to put on his coat, the rain had cleared, leaving a pale strip of morning sky visible over the harbor. At the doorway she murmured, "Friday, Friday," he agreed. He navigated the silent inland roads back home in the gray hours before dawn. Eleanor sent word through Camille, asking if she could visit the cottage once more before Friday. She did not want to come as a stranger or a guest, but as a grandmother longing to be properly introduced. Holt considered it for a full day. Finally, he said yes. She arrived at noon on Thursday. Marlowe was off from school for a teacher's workday. Marlowe had arranged her colored pencils on the coffee table in a neat row from yellow to violet. "Marlowe," Holt said gently, "this is Eleanor." "Hello again, ma'am." "Hello, Marlowe." The young girl studied her. "Daddy told me you knew my mom when she was a little girl." Holt had spent 2 days preparing for that exact moment, choosing every single word with care. "In a way," Eleanor whispered. "Yes." Marlowe opened up her sketchbook. "I am drawing a map of a house I have never seen. My mom told me about it. She said it was her great-grandmother's house with a gray porch, a tall spruce tree, and a long driveway leading down to the shore. My mother told me she only ever saw it in a dream." Holt watched Eleanor's hand grip the arm of his couch. He recognized it as her mother's Rockland house, the gray porch, the spruce, and that long driveway to the rocks. Sold in 1989, 16 years before Maggie even knew it existed. "May I see?" Eleanor asked, and Marlowe turned the sketchbook toward her. "Would you like to know what your grandmother looked like?" "Marlowe," Eleanor whispered, "I have a picture." Marlowe replied, "Daddy keeps it in the wooden box. It's the same as the one in Miss Hadley's purse, but Daddy says they're just different copies." Eleanor leaned down, bringing her face level with his young daughter's. She gently placed her hand over the back of Marlowe's hand. Marlowe didn't pull away, and Eleanor closed her eyes in silent relief. "Would you like me to show you where the spruce tree went on the south side?" Marlowe offered. "Mama said it was south. I drew it north by mistake." "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Yes, I would like that very much." Together they bent over the map. Eventually, Eleanor picked up a pencil while Holt watched silently from the hallway. He stepped outside onto the porch, and Eleanor joined him 40 minutes later. She had been crying silently, her face wet with tears. "I do not deserve any of this," she said. "I'm not the one who decides that," he replied. But she continued, if she asks why I wasn't in her mother's life. You tell her the truth, Eleanor insisted. Do not make it kinder. I want to be remembered honestly, she added, even if it's badly. Maggie would have wanted her to know you, he said. That is what I will tell her. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. You are a very good father, Mr. Pemberton. He offered no reply to that. Down the gravel drive, Camille leaned against her car, waiting. She had refused to step inside. When Eleanor reached her, Camille simply urged her mother to stay in Camden tonight. Don't go back to Boston, Eleanor gave a quiet nod. The two women finally drove away together in Camille's car. He went back inside to his daughter, who was meticulously erasing the misplaced spruce tree on her map. The 34th floor of Hadley Tower boasted towering glass walls overlooking the expanse of Boston Harbor. 12 people sat around the table, with Spencer Hadley dominating the head position. Camille marched inside, flanked by Thea Kelso on her left. On her right, Holt stood sharp in a charcoal gray suit, carrying a slim leather folder. He kept his gaze steady, looking neither at Spencer nor anyone else. It took Spencer 3 seconds to register. Our driver, Mr. Hadley, Camille announced. Today's agenda has been amended. Spencer half rose from his chair. On whose authority? Mine, Camille stated firmly. And before we begin, let me introduce our counsel. She placed a laminated ID card on the polished wood, sliding it to the center. Holt R. Pemberton, former special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. White-collar crime, Boston Field Office, 2018 to 2022. Holt watched the color drain in a sharp line from Spencer's hairline to his collar. In 2020, the case of United States versus Halleck had captured the prominent inside pages of the Wall Street Journal. Spencer had read it while standing in his own kitchen. He had laid the newspaper on the granite counter and copied the complex diagram by hand that night. Spencer thought he'd improved the scheme. But Holt didn't even stand up to present. Remaining seated, he spoke for 7 minutes, tearing the fraud apart using clinical accounting terms. Holt spoke without a trace of emotion. When he finished, the boardroom was dead silent. Thea Kelso laid a single sealed envelope right in the center of the table. She announced the Margaret Crane Trust, established in 1994 by Eleanor Hadley. It meant restoring everything to the name of Margaret Crane Pemberton, his deceased wife, with the entire balance restored under the guardianship of her surviving heir, his young daughter Marlo. The board had absolutely no authority over his late wife's trust, but their power did cover the chairmanship of the entire company. Spencer started to speak, but the door opened and Eleanor Hadley walked inside. She wore the exact same gray wool coat from her wedding day. She kept the coat on, refusing to even sit down. She said, "Spencer, you will resign from this board today, or I will divorce you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with the firm Mrs. Kelso is hired. Your choice." The entire boardroom held its breath. Spencer stared at the laminated card, then at the trust paperwork. He stared at his wife of 26 years, then resigned. He scribbled his official resignation on a yellow legal pad before walking out. They ran the vote anyway for the record. It was 11-0. The Department of Justice had the full case file before the day ended. By Tuesday of the following week, the Margaret Crane Trust was officially restored to Marlo, with Holt named as her legal guardian. The wire transfer cleared Tuesday afternoon. $45,312. Back in Camden, the confirmation message popped up on his workshop phone, where he sat quietly sanding down a kitchen chair leg. He checked the screen, set the phone aside, and kept sanding. 4 months later, in early April, Camden Harbor was the color of dull pewter. The snow was gone from the paths, and early crocus bloomed along the cottage steps. A gull walked the wharf, unhurried. Holt didn't have to drive for Hadley Group anymore. He'd handed in his notice just 2 days after the meeting. He never returned to the bureau, choosing to focus on private consulting, handling family trust disputes, allowing him to work right from his cottage. He would always be home when little Marlo got off the bus. In March, Marlo asked if Miss Hadley would still visit them on weekends. He told his daughter he hoped so. She just nodded like they were discussing the weather, and returned to her map. Camille, the stranger he once helped, resigned as CEO to lead as chairman. She promoted a new chief executive directly from the operations side. Though she kept her Boston apartment, she spent 3 days each week in Camden, staying in the small house she now leased for the entire year. Eleanor traveled up on weekends. Marlowe called her Grandma Elle, and they walked the wharf slowly every afternoon, walking the way a 51-year-old woman and a child of 7 do when unhurried. Eleanor never raised her voice, and she never offered an explanation. She simply listened, taking whatever colored pencil Marlowe handed over to her. On his workshop bookshelf, 2 framed photographs now stood side by side. Maggie's photo remained in its usual place, but Camille had hung a new one beside it, showing Marlowe and Camille sitting together on the weathered boards of the wharf. They both stared out at the water, ignoring the camera, wearing the exact same quiet expression. One April afternoon, they stood together at his workbench, looking down at his daughter's hand-drawn map. It was his family's old house in Rockland, with the spruce tree on the south side. The driveway curved just right, the porch was painted gray. "She got it right," Camille said. "She always does eventually," he replied quietly. Her hand rested on the worn wood of the bench right next to his. The tiny gap between their fingers was barely the width of a single knuckle. Neither of them closed the gap, and neither pulled away. Out on the porch, his daughter read aloud to Eleanor from a bird book. "Daddy," she called through the screen, "Grandma says the spruce on the south side is correct. Can we drive to Rockland this Sunday to see if the house is still standing?" "We can drive by, sweetheart," he said. "Can Miss Hadley come?" A quiet pause followed. She didn't turn her head. "Yes," he finally said, "Miss Hadley can come." The afternoon light reflecting off the harbor looked like tarnished silver. A seagull on the pier finished its walk and took to the sky. The old workshop smelled of fresh pine shavings, beeswax, and salty air from the open door. He never expected this stranger to be the key to his past.